So I've classified them as horizontal, vertical, and diagonal lines, and then the characteristics of those are listed down below. So if you have a horizontal line, its slope is always what?
0.
0. If you have a vertical line, its slope is always undefined. So remember that by you can never walk on a vertical surface, so it doesn't get a number at all. Horizontal surface you can walk on, but if you're not tilting any at all, right? So then it says what? Horizontal lines have what? What does this say down here? Okay, no x-intercept and a y-intercept, because clearly a horizontal line is going to cross which axis? Okay, it's going to cross the y-axis, so it's going to have a y-intercept.
All right, so y-intercept 0 and then...
Yeah, I'm going to try. I'll see if I can scroll over here so we can see the rest of it. Okay, so yeah, horizontal lines have no x-intercept because they do not cross the x-axis. But they do have a y-intercept at 0, k, assuming that k is where it crosses the axis. In this case, it looks like it's 0, 3. And the equation for any horizontal line is always y equals a number because that's the axis that it crosses. So, horizontal lines are always y equals a number. Vertical lines are always x equals a number, wherever it crosses the x-axis. And your diagonal lines, I have 3 different formats listed here. I have slope-intercept form, standard form, and then I think down below that, don't we have point-slope form? Yes. Okay, so and these are true also with, it's just easier to remember the horizontals and verticals by the simple equation rather than obtain them through this. So if your lines are diagonal, that's when you're going to use these 3 more complicated forms. Slope-intercept, standard, and point-slope. And the names help you a lot. What does the word slope-intercept mean? It means that when you have this equation, you know what? You know the slope, and you know the intercept, the y-intercept. That's why it's called slope-intercept form, right? Okay, what about a standard form? Anybody know what you can find easily when you're in standard form? I mean, really the only thing nice about standard form is it just looks kind of pretty because there's never fractions or decimals in standard form. You always make these whole numbers. But it is easy to find your x-intercept, your y-intercept, and also your slope in standard form. I mean, slope is easiest right here, but you can find slope when you're in this format by taking and putting a over b, the opposite of a over b. Okay? So this number over this number, change the sign. That's how you'll find slope in standard form. X-intercept is simply c divided by a. Because if you want to know the x-intercept, you're going to let y be 0. And if you let y be 0, guess what happens to this term underneath the arrows? It disappears. And what are you left with? If you solve that, if you solve for the x-intercept, it's going to be c over a. Okay, and if you solve for the y-intercept, it'll end up being c over b. All right, so then point-slope form. Is the last one down there at the bottom. And guess when you would use point-slope form? When you know what? Slope and a point. If you know a point and you know a slope, then you should use point-slope form. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's see. Then the next one's just a general information sheet. It kind of has the quadrants on there that we did in 3.1. Let me turn that one. Okay, so on this sheet, the other side of that one, you've got your 3.1 stuff. Here's your quadrants. Here's your midpoint formula. Here's your distance formula. Here's slope. This is basically the same thing that's on the other side, your 3 different formats, instructions on how to find an intercept. And then later on in the chapter, we'll get to parallel and perpendicular lines as well. Okay? So just lots of information there that you've had in previous classes about lines. All right? Everybody good with that? We're going to start talking about, if I give you an equation, can you tell if it's linear or nonlinear? Okay? Because it's important that you can tell if something's linear. So we went over the 3 forms for linear. I mean, obviously, if it's horizontal or vertical, it's a real simple format. but standard form, slope-intercept form, and point-slope form are linear equations. So if I give you something like this, 2 minus 3y equals 29 minus 6x. So I'm gonna give you a whole bunch of equations, and we're gonna classify them as either linear or not linear. Okay? Everybody with me? So what do you think on this one, linear or not linear? How do you know? Okay, well, can you put it in slope-intercept form or standard form easily? I could. I could put this thing in standard form. I could bring the 6x over right? And then subtract 2, and that'd be 27. There we go. That's standard form for a line. Everybody good with that? Okay. Who can tell me the slope of that line? How do you find slope when you're in standard form? Okay, so this is A, and this is B, right? So the opposite of A over B. Okay, A is a 6, and this is a negative 3, and I want the opposite of that overall, so that's going to end up being a positive 2. Does that make sense? That's my slope. How can I find my intercepts? How would I find the x-intercept? And keep in mind when you do an x-intercept that y is 0. Okay, so if I want to find an x-intercept, I let y be 0. What will I get if I let this y be 0? What will x end up being? Okay, well, let's do it. If I let y be 0, is everybody paying attention? If I let y be 0, what happens to this? Disappears, right? So I don't really need to work that out. I just cover this term up, right? And then I'm left with 6x equals 27. So what's x equal to? 27 over 6. Those are both divisible by 3. So if you divide them both by 3, you get what? 9/2. So there's your x-intercept right there. Is everybody good with that? Okay, how about finding the y-intercept? Same thing, but this time I let x be 0, right? If you want to find a y-intercept, then you want to let x be 0. So if x is a 0, that means this term cancels out, right? And then I'm left with 27 divided by negative 3, which is negative 9. So there's my y-intercept. Y-intercept, x-intercept, slope, all found from standard form. So my initial question, part A to this, or the first step in the question would be, is this linear? So you would have to say, yes, it is linear. It will make a line if you graph it. Okay, so now that we know it's linear, we found the slope, the x-intercept, and the y-intercept. Is everybody good with that? Okay. All right, let's do another one. How about this one? 4x plus 10xy equals 8y. What do you think, linear or not linear? Why is it not linear? Because you have an x times a y. There is no way to make this thing look like standard form or slope-intercept form or point-slope form because of the x times y, right? So because of this right here, it is not linear. Is everybody okay with that?
So if we have that on our certified?
Yep, it'll just be, is it linear or is it not linear? It's just a yes or no question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and they can't ask you a part 2 if it's not linear. Okay? Okay, so 9x, it doesn't mean there will be a part 2 just because it's a yes, but it's possible. So what do you think on this one? Well, that's what everybody thinks initially. But it's a little tricky. It's a little deceiving. Okay, so I need to distribute. So I have 9xy plus what, 72x
Oh, I see, yes.
equals 5. And now I distribute this negative 9y, and I get negative 36y, and I get positive what? 9xy. But what happens to the, initially you're looking at, well, this can't be linear, but my 9xy's cancel out of the problem. So now am I left with something that's linear? I am, so I could easily go to standard form on that. 72x plus 36y equals 5. And of course, in standard form, I can always find slope, my x-intercept, and my y-intercept. What would my slope be on this thing? How is slope calculated in standard form? Negative a over b, so it would be the opposite of 72 over 36, which is equal to negative 2. So my slope is negative 2. Okay, what if I wanted to find an x-intercept?
0, 1.
So if I want to find an x-intercept, I let y be 0. And if I let the y be 0, this term right here goes away. Just disappears, and I'm left with 72x equals 5. So if I have 72x, the 36y crosses out because I let the y be a 0. And then I solve, I get x equals 5 over 72. Is everybody good with that? Okay, how about my y-intercept? If I want to find a y-intercept, I let x be 0. So if I let x be 0, this goes away, and I'm left with 36y equals 5. So y is equal to what? 5 over 36. Okay, so my y-intercept is at 0, 5, 36. Everybody good with that? Okay? All right, how about,
So that would be linear.
that was linear. Linear. And then since it was linear, we went ahead and found the intercepts and the slope because there are questions on doing that as well. Okay? All right, how about this one? Let's say I've got 3x minus y over 5 plus 2y equals 7. Linear or nonlinear? And how do you know?
It's linear.
Yeah,
Why?
Because, like, once you get rid of the 5, that's there, right?
How would you get rid of the 5?
multiply each term.
Take every term times 5. So if I take this term times 5, the 5 will go away and I'll have 3x minus y. Take the second term times 5 and I get 10y. Take the last one times 5 and I get 35. So I took that entire thing times 5. Okay, so you're right. At this point, it would be very easy to get it to standard form. 3x plus 9y equals 35. Anybody want to take a stab at what the slope would be? Negative 3 over 9, which is negative 1/3, right? Okay, how about the x-intercept? See if you're getting faster at these. To find an x-intercept, you let y be 0. So if I let the y be 0, this term disappears, and I'm left with what? 35 over 3. Okay, if I want to do the y-intercept, I'm going to let x be the 0 this time. And if I let x be 0 in this thing, then this term disappears, and I'm left with what? 35 over 9. Does that make sense? All right, and that one was linear, right? Linear. Okay, how do I know it's linear? Because you can write it in standard form. If you can't get it to standard form, then it's not going to be linear. Okay, how about this one? X over y minus 3x equals 8.
No, it's not.
Why not?
Because you would have to multiply by y and get a 3.
You'd have to multiply by y, and then you get an x times y, right? If you take everything here times y, this one, the y is going to cancel, and you're left with just an x. But on the next one, you're going to get a 3xy, right? And you can't have an x times y, so you can remember it this way, too. You can never have an x divided by y. You can't have an x times y or an x divided by y in the same term. Okay? So, that is not linear. Because of the x divided by y or the y times x. Not linear. Everybody okay with that one? Okay. How about this one? 8x plus 6 equals negative 8y plus 6.
Wait, no.
It would just be
L equals 0.
Is that okay? Okay, well, let's see if we can get it in standard form. I can have my 8x, move my 8y over, and then take 6's off of both sides and have that. Is that okay? Is that still a line?
I think so.
Yeah, it is.
Is it straight? Straight line.
Well, they're all straight, but it's a perfect 45-degree angle. Okay? All right, so on this one, what would my slope be? How do you calculate slope? Negative a over b, so negative 8 over positive 8 would mean negative 1. So if my slope is negative 1, that means this line goes downhill, and my rise over run is 1 over 1. So it's a downhill perfect 45-degree angle. Okay, what about the intercepts on this one? What's my x-intercept?
It's
No, it's not undefined, because if you let y be 0, then you're left with 8x equals 0, and 0 divided by 8 is 0. So it goes through the origin. What about the y-intercept? Same thing, right? If the x-intercept is the origin, the y-intercept is going to be 2, because that's the one place where the two axes meet. Okay?
Call it the what?
What's that?
Did you say?
Axes means plural for axis.
No, before that.
I said if the origin, if your x-intercept is the origin, your y-intercept would also have to be the origin. Because if your line's going through this, it can't cross the y-axis twice,
That's true.
right? So they would be the same. Or you can just look at this and go, okay, it'd be 0 divided by 8 also. Okay? So that one was linear. Everybody good with that? Okay. How about this one? Linear or not linear?
No.
Why would this one not be linear?
Want to be a quadratic?
It's not a quadratic because it's got an x squared and a y squared. Okay? If it's got an x squared and a y squared, it's a circle.
But then it's going to come out with it equals the square root of 8.
It's not linear. That's our point, right? It is not linear because it has an x squared and a y squared. Okay? Some other things that are not linear, like Jada had just mentioned, what about a quadratic? So she's right. If you have any kind of an x squared in there, if you have something like this, that's not linear also because it has the squared in it. That would make a parabola. It would not make a line. Okay? Is everybody good with that? What if you had something like this? Linear or not linear? Okay, well, let's work it out and see what happens. So the x's disappear? Okay, Joseph says that's okay. Why is that okay? What type of line would this be? They're all straight.
Oh, dang it, that's what I did.
Your choices, here's your choices. Horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, okay? So if it's y equals a number, that's a horizontal line. If it's x equals a number, it's a vertical line. Anything else is diagonal, okay? So that's horizontal. Anybody remember the slope for a horizontal line? That's vertical.
I meant
Okay, horizontal, you can walk on, the slope is 0. What about x-intercepts and y-intercepts?
There's only a Y percent, right?
Like if it's a horizontal line, it's only going to cross the y-axis. Where's it going to cross the y-axis at? So you say 0, 6 for the y-intercept. Does it have an x-intercept? And I believe there's a little button that says absent. So for x-intercept, you would say absent. There is none. Okay, there is no x-intercept. It is absent. Okay, how about this one? -7 plus y, quantity squared, minus y squared equals -x plus 7. Jada?
Okay, on the last one,
Mhm.
are they gonna like, okay, on the, doing the practice,
Mm-hmm.
for the x-intercept,
Mhm.
just type absent?
No, it'll have a little,
Is it the circle?
it'll say either give me an intercept or poke the absent button, meaning it's not there. Okay? So there will be a choice of absent. Or at least that's what they used to call it. I didn't check it this year to make sure it's the same. Okay, so this one, linear or nonlinear?
Non-linear.
Well, that's what you would think because there's squares in there, right? But remember, we better double check this. I need to actually work this out and then put it with this and see if they do, because if the y squareds cancel, this could quickly become linear, right? So anybody remember the shortcut for doing one of these?
Oh, you just.
Square the first,
Yeah.
square the last, multiply and double. So square the first, 49. Multiply these two together and double that. So -7 times y is -7y. Double that, you get -14y. Okay, square this, you get y squared. Then I have a minus y squared and a -x plus 7. Okay, so my y squareds cancel. So what do you think now?
Oh my gosh.
so now it's
It is linear, right? Okay, so I'm going to have, if I put it in standard form, I'd have x. I'd move the x over here. I have the -14y. I would subtract 49 and end up with a -42. Okay? Slope. I don't think they even ask you for slope in this lesson. I just like to practice it from standard form because you'll need it in later lessons.
14.
1/14.
Okay, positive 1 over 14, the opposite of A over B. So -1 over -14 would be positive 1/14. X-intercept. That means let your y value be 0.
It's gonna be negative.
If I let my y be a 0, this disappears, and I end up with -42. Okay, y-intercept.
It's going to be 14, 42 over 14.
If you let x be 0, you're going to have -42 over -14, which will reduce to what? -14 over -42 would be positive. 7 goes in there, 6 and 2, so 3. Comes out positive 3. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So at this point, I want to go to Hawks and look at a couple of examples. Okay, so they want you to find the x and y intercepts. So to do that, what format should you go to? Standard form. So if I go to standard form, that thing's going to look like what? 6x minus 8y equals 24. Is everybody good with that? Okay, so x-intercept. If you want to find the x-intercept, you want to cover up the y, because in the x-intercept, the y value is a 0. So if I let this be a 0, I end up with 24 divided by 6, which is 4. Okay, so I'm going to type 4 in there in a second. So what if I want to find the y-intercept? Y-intercept means that I would want to leave the 8y and cross this one out, right? And then if I divide, I get what? negative 3. So my y-intercept is 0, negative 3. Okay? Now you would only use the absent button if you were dealing with a horizontal or vertical line. Okay? And notice they actually already have the parentheses here, so that you just have to type in the numbers. So it's 4, 0, and 0, negative 3. Let me type those in. 4, 0, 0, negative 3. That look right? Whoops, where's my 3? There we go. Submit answer, and there's a step 2. So let's look at step 2. Okay, step 2. Points can be moved by dragging or using the arrows. Okay, so there's a point right here, and I want to move it to the intercept. So what was my x-intercept? 4. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it over here to 4. Okay, now here's another one that shows up. What was my y-intercept? So I drag it down here to negative 3, and they draw a line through it. Okay, so we're graphing it by using intercepts. Okay, so you could quickly make that graph in your notes by simply drawing a little graph. It won't let me go to the pen. And drawing your intercepts and then drawing a line through it. Okay? Is everybody good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so submit. Next. You're in third hour. Yes. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, linear, nonlinear. So they're saying if it is linear, write it in standard form. Okay? Now, if you have a horizontal or vertical line, you can just simply write it as x equals a number or y equals a number, because that is standard form for horizontal and verticals. Okay? And so this is only a one-step problem, but you would simply put that in standard form to show that it's linear and type that in there. So negative 3x plus 10y plus 10x equals 3. So then I end up with what? 7x plus 10y equals 3. Okay, that's linear. So you would click linear and you would type that in this box. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to skip that. What do you think, linear or not linear? I'm not going to work this one out because I want to get to a couple other problems. Why?
Well,
Why would you say that?
can't multiply by
It's linear.
Actually, let's do that one real quick. It won't take us too long. What would you need to do to show that it's linear?
multiply by 6 and 10.
Okay, what is 6 times 5? So multiply everything by a 30, right? So if you take everything times 30, this reduce, oh, that's not showing up for you guys. It says reconnecting.